I'm Sarah, 34 years old, and I stood alone at my husband's graveside watching them lower his casket into the ground. Not a single member of my family showed up, not my parents, not my sister, not even my best friend who I'd known since childhood. The funeral director kept glancing at me with pity as I stood there in my black dress, the only mourner at what should have been a celebration of Michael's life. What they didn't know was that their absence wasn't just cruel, it was about to backfire spectacularly, because the will reading was scheduled for the next day. Hey everyone! Before we dive into this incredible story of family betrayal and ultimate justice, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. If you're ready for a wild ride full of shocking revelations and the most satisfying revenge you've ever heard, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe because this story will blow your mind. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when karma finally catches up to people who think blood means nothing. Let's get started. Michael and I had been married for 8 years, and from the outside, we looked like the perfect couple. He was a successful investment banker. I worked as a marketing director for a tech startup, and we lived in a beautiful Victorian house in the suburbs that we'd spent 3 years renovating together. Every family gathering, every holiday photo, every social media post painted us as the golden couple who had it all figured out. But perfection, I learned, is often just a carefully constructed lie. The problem started about 2 years into our marriage, though I was too naive to recognize the signs. Michael began working later and later, claiming big deals and important clients. Weekend golf trips became more frequent. His phone, once carelessly left around the house, became permanently attached to his hip. When I'd ask about his day, his answers grew shorter and more vague. My family adored Michael. My mother would constantly gush about how lucky I was to have found such a provider, while my father respected his business acumen. My sister Emma, 2 years younger than me, would always comment on our social media posts about how she hoped to find someone just like him someday. Even my best friend Jessica, who had been skeptical of every guy I'd dated before, welcomed Michael into our tight-knit group with open arms. "You two are relationship goals," Jessica would say whenever we'd all hang out together. "I mean, look at how he treats you, Sarah. He's always so attentive and caring." And he was, at least in public. Michael knew exactly how to play the part of the devoted husband when others were watching. He'd bring me flowers after work, hold my hand during family dinners, and tell anyone who would listen how much he loved me. He was charming, funny, and seemingly completely devoted to our marriage. The first real crack in the facade came during our 6th anniversary dinner. We'd gone to this upscale Italian restaurant downtown, the same place where he'd proposed. Michael had been distracted all evening, checking his phone repeatedly despite my gentle protests. Finally, I confronted him about it. "Who keeps texting you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light and non-accusatory. "Just work stuff," he replied quickly, sliding his phone face down on the table. "You know how it is with the Henderson account." But I didn't know about any Henderson account, and that night I realized I didn't really know much about Michael's work at all. He'd always been vague about the details, claiming I wouldn't find it interesting. I'd accepted this explanation for years, trusting him completely. That night marked the beginning of my growing suspicions, though I pushed them down, telling myself I was being paranoid. After all, everyone thought we were perfect together. My family constantly reminded me how fortunate I was, how many women would kill for a husband like Michael. Surely, I was just overthinking things. The distance between us grew gradually. Our conversations became more superficial, our physical intimacy less frequent. Michael started taking business trips that seemed to come up at the last minute. When I'd suggest couples activities or vacations, he'd always have some excuse about work commitments or financial responsibility. "We need to be smart about our money, Sarah," he'd say whenever I brought up taking a real vacation. "I'm working hard to secure our future." I bought into it completely. I even defended him to friends who occasionally commented on his absence from social gatherings. "He's just really dedicated to providing for us," I'd explain, parroting his own words back to them. Looking back now, I can see how perfectly he manipulated the situation. He positioned himself as the hardworking provider while making me look like the demanding wife if I ever complained. My family and friends saw his success and his public displays of affection, never the growing coldness in private. The irony wasn't lost on me later. Everyone who thought our marriage was so perfect would eventually use that same perfection as a weapon against me. But that revelation was still months away, hidden behind Michael's carefully constructed lies and my own desperate desire to believe in the fairy tale we were selling to the world. The first concrete evidence that something was seriously wrong came on a rainy Thursday evening in October. I'd come home early from work with a migraine and decided to surprise Michael with his favorite dinner, homemade lasagna with garlic bread. I spent 2 hours in the kitchen, despite my pounding headache, thinking maybe a romantic evening at home would help bridge the growing gap between us. When Michael walked through the door at his usual 8 p.m., he seemed startled to see me in the kitchen. "You're home early," he said, his voice carrying a strange edge I'd never heard before. "Migraine," I explained, gesturing toward the elaborate spread I'd prepared. "But I wanted to make your favorite. I thought we could have a nice quiet evening together, maybe talk about our weekend plans." Instead of the gratitude or affection I expected, Michael looked almost annoyed. He glanced at his phone, then back at me, then at his phone again. "I actually can't stay," he said, loosening his tie. "Emergency conference call with the Tokyo office. Different time zones, you know. I'll probably be on the call until midnight." My heart sank, but I forced a smile. "Can't you eat first? I spent all afternoon." "Sarah, this is really important," he interrupted, his tone sharper than usual. "The Henderson account depends on this call. You know I wouldn't miss dinner unless it was absolutely crucial." There was that Henderson account again. I made a mental note to ask him about it later, but for now I just nodded and started wrapping up the food. As I moved around the kitchen cleaning up, I noticed Michael hadn't gone upstairs to change into comfortable clothes like he usually did. Instead, he was standing in the hallway, typing furiously on his phone. 20 minutes later, he was gone, claiming he needed to drive to the office for better internet connection for his international call. That's when I made the decision that changed everything. Instead of going to bed early like I'd planned, I decided to surprise him at his office with dinner. I packed up a plate of lasagna and drove the 15 minutes to his downtown building, proud of myself for being such a supportive wife. The security guard in the lobby knew me from previous surprise visits over the years. "Hey, Mrs. Thompson," he greeted me warmly. "Working late again?" "Something like that," I replied. "Michael's in an important conference call, so I thought I'd bring him some dinner." The guard's expression shifted slightly. "Conference call? But I haven't seen Mr. Thompson come in tonight. Are you sure he's here?" My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "He left home about an hour ago saying he needed to come here for a call with Tokyo." The security guard looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I've been on duty since 4 p.m., and Mr. Thompson definitely hasn't been here tonight. His office has been dark all evening." I felt the world tilt on its axis. Standing there in the sterile lobby, holding a plate of homemade lasagna, I realized that my husband had just told me a bold-faced lie. Not a small white lie about liking my haircut or being too tired for dinner plans, a calculated deception about where he was spending his evening. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing through possibilities. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. Maybe he'd gone to a colleague's house for the call. Maybe the security guard was wrong or had stepped away when Michael arrived. But deep down, I knew. The signs I'd been ignoring for months suddenly crystallized into an undeniable pattern. The late nights, the secretive phone behavior, the sudden increase in business trips, the way he'd been emotionally distant despite maintaining his public facade of devotion. When Michael came home at 12:47 a.m., I was awake, staring at the ceiling. He slipped into bed quietly, assuming I was asleep. "How was your call?" I whispered into the darkness. He stiffened beside me. "Fine. Productive. We secured the Henderson account." Another lie, delivered so smoothly it was almost impressive. I wanted to confront him right then, to demand the truth, but something held me back. Maybe it was cowardice, or maybe it was instinct telling me I needed to know more before I could act. "That's wonderful," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil in my chest. From that night forward, I began paying attention to details I'd previously overlooked. The way he'd shower immediately when he came home late. How his clothes sometimes smelled like perfume that wasn't mine. The fact that his credit card statements, which used to be left carelessly on the kitchen counter, had mysteriously started being delivered to his office instead. I also began noticing how differently my family and friends treated our marriage troubles when I tentatively brought up my concerns. When I mentioned to my mother that Michael seemed distracted lately, she brushed off my worries. "All successful men get consumed by their work sometimes, Sarah," she said dismissively. "You should be grateful you have a husband who's so dedicated to providing for you." Jessica's response was similar when I carefully probed about relationships and trust during one of our weekly coffee dates. "Michael worships you," she said definitively. "I've seen how he looks at you, how he talks about you when you're not around. You're probably just overthinking things because you're so happy." Sometimes we sabotage our own good fortune. Their responses stung more than I expected. Instead of validation for my growing concerns, I received lectures about gratitude and overthinking. It became clear that everyone around me was so invested in the image of our perfect marriage that they couldn't, or wouldn't, see the cracks that were becoming impossible for me to ignore. 3 weeks after the conference call incident, I hired a private investigator. It felt like the most surreal moment of my life, sitting in a cramped office above a deli, handing over a retainer check to a middle-aged woman named Detective Patricia Pat Morrison, who specialized in marital investigations. 90% of the wives who come through that door already know the truth, Pat told me matter-of-factly as she opened Michael's file. They just need proof to make it real. She was right, of course. By then, I'd already connected most of the dots. The mysterious phone calls, the changed behavior, the lies about work, it all pointed to one obvious conclusion. But knowing something and having evidence are two very different things, especially when everyone around you is convinced your marriage is perfect. Pat was thorough and professional. Within a week, she'd confirmed what my gut had been screaming for months. Michael was having an affair. But the details were so much worse than I'd imagined. Her name was Veronica Hayes, a 28-year-old pharmaceutical sales rep with long blonde hair and a bright smile that she plastered all over her very public Instagram account. According to Pat's investigation, they'd been involved for over 2 years, meaning the affair had started during what I'd thought was the happiest period of our marriage. But the betrayal ran deeper than just infidelity. Pat discovered that Michael had been systematically hiding assets, moving money from our joint accounts into personal investments that I knew nothing about. He'd opened credit cards in his name only and had been financing their relationship, expensive dinners, weekend getaways to upstate resorts, jewelry that definitely wasn't for me, with money I'd assumed was going toward our future together. "He's been planning this for a while," Pat explained, showing me bank statements and credit card records. "This isn't just an affair, Sarah. This is a methodical exit strategy. He's been setting himself up to leave the marriage with as much as possible while leaving you with as little as he can manage." The most devastating discovery came when Pat showed me printed screenshots from Veronica's social media accounts. There were photos of her wearing jewelry I recognized, pieces I'd assumed Michael had bought for future anniversaries or special occasions. There were pictures of her in restaurants where Michael had claimed to be having business dinners. Most crushing of all, there were photos of them together at our weekend house in the mountains, the cabin we'd bought together as a romantic retreat. "She's not trying to hide this relationship," Pat observed. "She's proud of it. Look at the captions." I forced myself to read them. "Weekend getaway with my love. So grateful for this amazing man in my life. Can't wait to start our future together. Our future together." The words hit like a physical blow. But Pat had saved the worst revelation for last. As she handed me a final folder, her expression was unusually grim. "Sarah, there's something else you need to know. This isn't Michael's first affair." Inside the folder were records going back 5 years, documenting at least 3 other relationships Michael had maintained during our marriage. Pat had traced hotel bookings, restaurant charges, and even vacation rentals that coincided with times when Michael had told me he was traveling for work alone. "He's what we call a serial cheater," Pat explained. "This is a pattern, not a mistake. And based on what I've found, your friends and family might have known more than they let on." That last statement hit me like ice water. What do you mean? Pat pulled out her tablet and showed me a series of social media posts and location check-ins. There were pictures of Emma, my own sister, at the same restaurant where Michael had been photographed with one of his earlier affairs. Jessica had liked several photos on Veronica's Instagram account, including ones where she was clearly with a married man, though Michael's face wasn't visible. I'm not saying they knew for certain, Pat clarified. But there are enough coincidences here to suggest that people in your circle have seen things. Whether they connected the dots or chose to ignore them is another question. I spent that night going through everything Pat had given me, spread out across my kitchen table like evidence in a murder case. Each document, each photo, each credit card statement painted a picture of a marriage that had been a complete lie for years. While I'd been defending Michael to concerned friends, planning our future, and working to improve our relationship, he'd been systematically betraying me with multiple women and preparing to abandon our life together. The cruelest part was realizing how many opportunities there had been for someone, anyone, to tell me the truth. Emma had been in the same social circles as some of Michael's affairs. Jessica, who prided herself on being protective of me, had clearly seen enough to at least ask questions. My parents, who considered themselves excellent judges of character, had never once expressed any concerns about Michael's behavior despite the obvious signs. But perhaps most devastating was the realization that Michael had never intended for our marriage to be permanent. Every anniversary celebration, every future plan we'd made together, every time he'd told me he loved me, it had all been performance art, a carefully maintained facade while he lived his real life with other women. As I sat there surrounded by evidence of years of deception, I made two decisions. First, I was going to confront Michael with everything I'd learned. Second, I was going to find out exactly how much my family and friends had known, and why none of them had thought I deserved the truth. I had no idea that within 6 months, I'd be standing at Michael's funeral completely alone, or that the revelations about my family's knowledge and complicity would make his death seem like just the beginning of a much larger betrayal. I waited until the following Saturday morning to confront Michael. He'd slept in late, as had become his habit on weekends, and I'd spent the early hours organizing Pat's evidence into neat folders on the kitchen table. When he finally wandered downstairs in his robe, coffee mug in hand, he found me sitting there with 8 months' worth of documented proof of his double life spread out before me. "What's all this?" he asked, his tone casual, but his eyes immediately alert. "Sit down, Michael," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "We need to talk." The next hour was simultaneously the most devastating and liberating conversation of my life. I watched Michael's face cycle through denial, anger, bargaining, and finally resignation as I methodically presented each piece of evidence. The bank statements showing secret accounts. The hotel receipts for rooms I'd never been in. The photos of him with Veronica and the others. "How long have you been having me followed?" he demanded when he realized the scope of what I knew. "Long enough to understand that our entire marriage has been a lie," I replied. 2 years, Michael? You've been with Veronica for 2 years, and God knows how many others before her. He didn't deny it. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and ran his hands through his hair, the gesture I'd once found endearing now seeming manipulative and calculated. "Look, Sarah," he said finally, "this isn't how I wanted you to find out." "Find out what, exactly?" I pressed. "That you're cheating? That you've been stealing from our joint accounts? That you've been planning to leave me while pretending to be the perfect husband?" "It's more complicated than that." "Actually, it's not," I shot back, surprised by the strength in my own voice. "You made choices, Michael. Every day for years, you chose to lie to me. You chose to risk my health by sleeping with other women. You chose to steal money we'd saved together. You chose to make me look like an idiot to everyone we know." That's when he said something that still haunts me. "Everyone we know already suspected, Sarah. You were the only one naive enough to believe in us." The casual cruelty of that statement took my breath away. Not only had he been systematically betraying me, but he was suggesting that my friends and family had known and simply chosen not to tell me. "What is that supposed to mean?" I whispered. Michael shrugged, as if we were discussing the weather. "Come on, Sarah. You don't think Emma never noticed me with other women when we'd run in the same circles? You don't think Jessica never wondered why I was always working late but never seemed stressed about actual work? Your parents knew something was off. They just chose to focus on the financial security I provided rather than dig deeper. I felt like I was drowning. The betrayal was expanding beyond just Michael to potentially include everyone I trusted most. You're lying, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I remembered all the deflected conversations, the dismissive responses when I'd tried to voice concerns, the way people had seemed almost annoyed when I'd mentioned marriage troubles. Am I? Michael asked, his tone almost pitying. Think about it, Sarah. How many times did you try to talk to people about us having problems, and they shut you down? How many times did they tell you how lucky you were, how perfect we seemed? They had a vested interest in maintaining the illusion. What kind of vested interest? Your parents loved bragging about their successful son-in-law to their friends. Emma loved having access to the lifestyle our money provided, those vacations we paid for, the networking connections through my work. Jessica loved being part of our perfect couple friend group. It made her feel sophisticated and successful by association. Each word felt like a physical blow. I wanted to argue, to defend the people I loved, but fragments of memories were already surfacing that supported his claims. The way my mother would steer conversations away from my marriage concerns and toward Michael's latest promotion. How Emma had never once offered genuine support when I'd hinted at relationship troubles, instead making jokes about first-world problems. The way Jessica had seemed almost irritated the few times I'd tried to have serious conversations about my marriage. But just as I was spiraling into despair about everyone I trusted, Michael made a fatal mistake. He got cocky. Look, the truth is, you were convenient for a while, he said, leaning forward with that charming smile that had once made me feel like the luckiest woman in the world. You're smart, you're attractive. You made me look good professionally and socially. But I'm 35 now and I want something different. Veronica understands what I need in ways you never could. The dismissive cruelty in his voice flipped a switch in me. All the grief and self-doubt I'd been feeling crystallized into cold, clear anger. So this has all been calculated, I said slowly. The affairs, the hidden money, even this conversation right now. You've been planning your exit for years. I've been planning my future, he corrected. And honestly, Sarah, you should be grateful. I could have strung this along for a few more years, but I'm giving you a chance to start over while you're still young enough to find someone else. The audacity was breathtaking. He was framing his systematic betrayal as some kind of favor to me. How generous, I replied, my voice dripping with sarcasm. That's when Michael outlined his proposal. A quick, quiet divorce where I'd keep the house, but he'd retain most of our joint investments and savings. He'd already consulted with a lawyer, of course, and felt confident he could make a case for keeping the majority of assets since he'd been the higher earner throughout our marriage. This way, we can both move on without a messy public battle, he explained. Your family and friends can save face, and you won't have to deal with the embarrassment of everyone knowing the details of why we're splitting up. Looking back now, I realize that was the moment everything changed. Not just my marriage, but my entire understanding of the people closest to me and my place in their lives. Michael wasn't just asking me to accept his betrayal quietly. He was asking me to protect everyone else from the consequences of their complicity in that betrayal. I stood up from the table, gathering Pat's evidence folders with steady hands. I need some time to think about this, I told him. Of course, Michael said, looking relieved that I seemed to be taking his proposal so calmly. Take all the time you need. But Sarah, I really think this is the best solution for everyone involved. As I walked upstairs to our bedroom, I could hear him already on the phone, probably calling Veronica to tell her how smoothly the conversation had gone. He had no idea that I was about to turn his carefully laid plans completely upside down. You know what? I can see some of you might be wondering if I was crazy for not seeing this coming sooner, or maybe you're thinking about your own relationships right now. If this story is hitting close to home, I need you to stick around because what happened next changed everything. Before we continue, let me know in the comments, have you ever had that gut feeling that something was wrong but everyone around you insisted everything was perfect? Sometimes our instincts know what our hearts don't want to accept. Hit that subscribe button if you want to see how the story ends. Trust me, karma has some surprises in store. What Michael didn't know was that I'd already retained my own divorce attorney, a shark named Margaret Winters who Pat had recommended. While Michael thought he'd been planning his exit strategy in secret, I'd been 2 steps ahead, documenting everything and building my own case. But the real revelation came 3 days after our kitchen table confrontation, when I decided to test Michael's claims about my family and friends' knowledge of his affairs. I started with Jessica, asking her to meet me for coffee under the pretense of needing emotional support during marriage troubles. "I'm so sorry you're going through a rough patch," Jessica said as we settled into our usual corner table at the cafe where we'd met weekly for 3 years. "But honestly, Sarah, all couples go through phases. You and Michael will work it out. You always do." "What if it's more serious than just a phase?" I pressed. "What if there were other people involved?" Jessica's reaction was immediate and telling. Her eyes darted away from mine, and she began fidgeting with her coffee cup. "Sarah, you can't think like that. Michael adores you. Everyone can see how much he loves you. But what if everyone was wrong?" I continued, watching her face carefully. What if there were signs that people saw but didn't mention? That's when Jessica made the mistake that confirmed Michael's cruelest assertion. She pulled out her phone and showed me Veronica's Instagram account, the same account Pat had found, the same photos I'd already seen. "Look, I know you're worried, but this is the kind of thing you'd need to be concerned about," Jessica said, scrolling through Veronica's photos. Some young woman posting about her mystery boyfriend, probably trying to make some married man look available when he's not. Michael would never. She stopped mid-sentence when she realized what she'd just revealed. "You know who she is," I said quietly. Jessica's face went white. "Sarah, You've been following her Instagram account. You've seen the photos, the captions about her amazing man. You know she's been with a married man, and it never occurred to you to warn me that my husband might be that man." The silence stretched between us as Jessica struggled to find an explanation that didn't sound like the betrayal it was. "I didn't want to worry you over nothing," she finally said. "I mean, lots of men work in similar industries, go to the same restaurants. It could have been anyone. But you suspected it was Michael." I thought there might be a possibility, but I didn't have proof, and I didn't want to ruin your marriage over suspicions. "So you chose to let me continue living a lie rather than give me information that might help me protect myself." Jessica started crying then, but her tears felt manipulative rather than genuine. "Sarah, please understand. I was trying to protect you. You seemed so happy, and I thought maybe it would just run its course and you'd never have to know." That conversation lasted 2 more hours, during which Jessica revealed that she'd suspected Michael's infidelity for over a year. She'd seen him with different women on multiple occasions, including twice with Veronica at restaurants in our neighborhood. She'd even considered confronting him directly but decided it wasn't her place to interfere in our marriage. The most devastating part was learning that Jessica had discussed her suspicions with Emma, my own sister. They'd both agreed that telling me would just hurt me unnecessarily, and that it was better to let sleeping dogs lie. My conversation with Emma 2 days later was even worse. "Of course I knew," Emma said when I finally cornered her. "I've known about Michael's cheating for years, Sarah. I thought you knew too, and we're just choosing to ignore it for the financial security." The casual way she admitted it, as if my ignorance was my own fault, left me speechless. "Years," I managed to whisper. "The first one I noticed was about 3 years ago," Emma continued, seemingly oblivious to the devastation her words were causing. "Some brunette he was with at that charity gala where you had food poisoning and couldn't go. They were all over each other. I figured you knew and had some kind of arrangement." "An arrangement?" "You know, like some marriages have. You get the lifestyle and social status. He gets to have his fun on the side. Lots of successful couples work that way." I stared at my sister, this person I'd loved and trusted my entire life, and realized I'd never really known her at all. "And you never thought to mention this to me? Never thought I might want to know that my husband was cheating on me at public events?" Emma shrugged, a gesture so dismissive it took my breath away. "It wasn't my business, Sarah. Besides, you seemed happy enough with your house and your lifestyle. I didn't want to rock the boat. Rock the boat. I repeated, incredulous. Look, let's be honest here, Emma said, her tone becoming almost aggressive. Michael has been good for this whole family. The connections he's provided, the networking opportunities, the financial help when Dad's business was struggling last year. Did you think that money just materialized out of nowhere? Michael wrote that $30,000 check to save Dad's company. You think I was going to jeopardize that over some affairs that weren't affecting anyone's daily life? The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. My family hadn't just known about Michael's cheating. They'd been financially benefiting from our marriage while choosing to keep me in the dark about his betrayals. So you've all been protecting him instead of me, I said slowly. We've been protecting everyone, Emma replied. Including you. You think your life would have been better if you'd known? You think you would have been happier divorced and struggling financially instead of living in ignorance with security? That question haunted me as I drove home, because it revealed something about my family that I'd never wanted to acknowledge. They saw me as someone who needed to be managed and protected from the truth, rather than as an adult capable of making my own decisions about my life. The final confirmation came when I confronted my parents the next evening. My mother's response was perhaps the most crushing of all. Sweetheart, all men stray sometimes, she said matter-of-factly. The important thing is that Michael always came home to you. He provided well, he was respectful in public, and he never embarrassed the family. Isn't that worth overlooking some indiscretions? Indiscretions? I repeated. Mom, he's been systematically cheating on me for years and stealing money from our joint accounts. Stealing is a strong word, my father interjected. Michael earned that money. If he chose to spend some of it on entertainment, that's between you and him. Entertainment, I said flatly. The point is, my mother continued, you had a good life with Michael. You had security, respect in the community, a beautiful home. Now you're throwing all of that away over some affairs that probably didn't mean anything to him. But they meant something to me, I said, tears finally coming. My marriage meant something to me. My parents exchanged a look that I'd seen countless times throughout my life, the look that said I was being dramatic, unrealistic, naive about how the world really worked. Sarah, my father said in his most patronizing tone, this is exactly why we didn't tell you. We knew you'd react emotionally instead of thinking practically about what's best for everyone. That night, I sat alone in my house, the house Michael had already mentally divided in his exit strategy, and realized that I'd been living in a complete fantasy. Not just about my marriage, but about my family and friends. Everyone I trusted most had been protecting a lie that benefited them while leaving me vulnerable and humiliated. But as devastating as these revelations were, they also gave me something I hadn't expected, absolute clarity about what I needed to do next. If everyone wanted to protect Michael and preserve the status quo, they were about to learn what happened when the person they'd been lying to decided to stop playing along. The week following my conversations with Jessica, Emma, and my parents, I threw myself into planning with an intensity that surprised even me. Margaret Winters, my attorney, was impressed by the thoroughness of the evidence I'd gathered and the strategic thinking I brought to our meetings. Most people in your situation are too emotional to think clearly, Margaret told me during our third consultation. But you're approaching this like a chess game. That's going to serve you well. She was right. The betrayal had been so complete, so systematic, that it had burned away my emotional attachment to preserving relationships or protecting people's feelings. Everyone had made their choices. Now I was going to make mine. The first part of my plan was financial. Thanks to Pat's investigation, I had documentation of every hidden account, every secret expenditure, and every asset Michael had tried to move without my knowledge. Margaret filed motions to freeze all joint accounts and obtained court orders preventing Michael from moving any additional money. We also filed for temporary spousal support that would ensure I could maintain our lifestyle during the divorce proceedings. Michael was furious when he received the papers. He stormed into the house on a Tuesday evening, waving the documents and shouting about betrayal and ungrateful wives. The irony wasn't lost on me. This isn't what we agreed on, Sarah, he said, his charming facade completely dropped now. This is going to get ugly and embarrass everyone. You mean it's going to embarrass you, I corrected. I'm not the one who's been living a double life. Think about your family, he pressed. Think about your friends. Do you really want to drag everyone through this publicly? But I'd already thought about my family and friends. I'd thought about them a lot. The second part of my plan involved everyone who had known about Michael's affairs and chosen to keep me in the dark. If they wanted to maintain their comfortable illusions about our perfect marriage, they were going to pay a price for that privilege. I started with Jessica. 3 days after our coffee confrontation, I sent her a carefully crafted text message. Hi. I wanted to let you know that Michael and I are getting divorced. Since you've been such a good friend and clearly knew about his affairs before I did, I was hoping you could help me understand the timeline. I'm putting together a complete picture for the lawyers, and I need to know exactly when you first suspected he was cheating and who else you might have discussed it with. Thanks for your support during this difficult time. Jessica called me within an hour, panicked. Sarah, you can't seriously be dragging me into your divorce proceedings. I'm not dragging you into anything, I replied calmly. You dragged yourself into it when you chose to monitor his affair partner on social media instead of telling me what you knew. Now I need that information for my legal case. But I could be called as a witness, Jessica protested. People will know I knew and didn't tell you. It'll look terrible. Yes, I agreed. It will. I sent similar messages to Emma and my parents, each tailored to their specific level of involvement and knowledge. Emma received a particularly detailed request for information about all the times she'd witnessed Michael with other women, including dates, locations, and whether she'd photographed or documented any of these encounters. My parents received a formal letter from Margaret's office requesting their cooperation in documenting the $30,000 loan Michael had made to my father's business, including the terms of repayment and whether they'd known at the time that the money was coming from joint marital assets. The panic was immediate and satisfying. Emma called first, screaming about how I was destroying the whole family over a cheating husband. You're going to make us all look terrible, she cried. People will think we're horrible for not telling you. You were horrible for not telling me, I replied simply. Sarah, please. Think about what this will do to Mom and Dad's reputation in the community. Think about how this reflects on all of us. I did think about it, I said. For about 30 seconds. Then I remembered that none of you thought about how your lies would affect me. My mother tried a different approach, appealing to family loyalty and suggesting we handle everything privately without involving lawyers. When that failed, my father attempted to negotiate, offering to pay back the $30,000 immediately if I'd agree to leave their names out of the divorce proceedings. It's too late for that, I told him. You should have thought about consequences before you decided to take money from my marriage while helping my husband hide his affairs. But the real masterstroke of my plan was still to come. Thanks to Pat's investigation, I had comprehensive evidence not just of Michael's infidelity, but of his financial misconduct. The secret accounts, the misuse of joint funds, the hidden assets, all of it painted a picture of someone who had been systematically defrauding our marriage for years. Margaret filed a motion for fraud discovery, which meant we could investigate all of Michael's business dealings and personal finances. What we found was even worse than I'd imagined. Michael hadn't just been cheating and hiding money, he'd been embezzling from his investment firm. The successful banker image that everyone admired was built on a foundation of stolen client funds and falsified reports. The luxury lifestyle he'd used to impress my family, the expensive gifts for his affairs, the secret accounts, it had all been financed with money that wasn't his. When the FBI got involved 2 weeks later, Michael's whole world came crashing down. The affairs seemed trivial compared to federal fraud charges and the possibility of decades in prison. I watched his arrest from our living room window, surrounded by boxes of evidence that would ensure I recovered every penny he'd stolen from our marriage. As federal agents led him away in handcuffs, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. The people who had protected Michael's secrets while betraying mine were about to face the consequences of their choices. My parents would have to explain to their friends why their successful son-in-law was being investigated for embezzlement. Emma would have to answer questions about why she'd known about his affairs, but said nothing. Jessica would have to live with everyone knowing she'd prioritized her own comfort over her best friend's well-being. But none of us knew that this was just the beginning. Michael's legal troubles were about to take a turn that would make everything else seem like a minor inconvenience, and the final act of this drama would leave me standing completely alone at his funeral, finally understanding the true cost of everyone's betrayal. Michael died in a car accident 6 weeks after his arrest, while out on bail and facing federal fraud charges. The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd spent years planning his exit from our marriage, only to make the most permanent exit of all before he could face the consequences of his crimes. The call came from his lawyer on a rainy Tuesday morning. Michael had been driving to meet with federal prosecutors for a plea negotiation when he lost control of his car on a wet highway curve. He was pronounced dead at the scene. My first emotion wasn't grief. It was a strange, hollow relief. The man I'd married had died years ago, replaced by a stranger who'd systematically betrayed everyone who trusted him. The person in that car accident was someone I'd never really known. But nothing prepared me for what happened next. 3 days before the funeral, I called my parents to discuss arrangements and was met with cold silence. "We don't think it's appropriate for us to attend," my mother said, her voice formal and distant. "What do you mean?" I asked, though part of me already understood. "Sarah, your vindictive legal actions destroyed that poor man," my father added, his tone heavy with accusation. "If you hadn't been so determined to ruin him publicly, he might still be alive today." The audacity took my breath away. My vindictive actions? He was embezzling money, Dad. He was stealing from clients and defrauding his own company. "That's between him and his business associates," my mother replied. "It had nothing to do with your marriage or your divorce. It had everything to do with our marriage. He was funding his affairs and his secret life with stolen money. You could have handled this privately," my father said. "Instead, you chose to humiliate him publicly and drag the whole family through scandal. Now he's dead, and frankly, Sarah, we think you bear some responsibility for that." I hung up the phone in shock, but the calls continued. Emma was next, her voice cold with judgment. "I hope you're satisfied," she said without preamble. "Michael is dead because you couldn't just accept that marriages aren't perfect and move on quietly. You had to destroy everything out of spite. Emma, he was a criminal. He was stealing money from innocent people. He was my brother-in-law," she interrupted. "He was family. And you chose to side with strangers over your own blood." Jessica's call was perhaps the most hurtful because I'd expected better from someone who'd claimed to be my best friend for 15 years. "I can't be at the funeral, Sarah," she said, her voice shaking. "I feel too guilty about what happened. If I hadn't told you about those Instagram photos, maybe you wouldn't have dug so deep. Maybe he'd still be alive." "Jessica, you didn't tell me about the photos," I reminded her. "You accidentally revealed that you already knew about them. There's a difference." "The point is, this whole investigation started because of information I gave you," she replied. "And now Michael is dead and his family is destroyed, and I can't be part of that." One by one, everyone I'd expected to support me through the loss of my husband, even a husband who had betrayed me, chose instead to blame me for the consequences of his own actions. My parents, my sister, my best friend, even some of our mutual acquaintances, all decided that my pursuit of truth and justice had been more damaging than Michael's years of lies and crimes. The morning of the funeral, I stood alone in our empty house, looking at the black dress I'd chosen and wondering if I was making a mistake by going. But I realized that attending wasn't about Michael or our failed marriage. It was about closure for myself and respect for the man I'd thought I married before I learned who he really was. The funeral home was nearly empty. Michael's parents had flown in from Florida, but they could barely look at me. A few colleagues from his firm attended, probably more out of professional obligation than genuine grief. His lawyer was there, along with Veronica, who sat in the back row wearing oversized sunglasses and clutching tissues. But not a single member of my own family came. Not my parents, who had benefited from Michael's stolen money. Not my sister, who had watched him cheat for years without warning me. Not my best friend, who had prioritized her own comfort over my well-being. As I sat in the front row, the only person there with the legal right to make decisions about his burial, I realized that their absence was actually a gift. It showed me exactly where I stood with the people I'd loved most, and it freed me from any remaining obligation to protect their feelings or maintain relationships built on deception. The pastor, who barely knew Michael, gave a generic eulogy about loving husbands and successful careers. I wanted to laugh at the irony, but instead I sat quietly and thought about the future I was going to build without any of these people in it. After the service, as I watched them lower Michael's casket into the ground with only a handful of mourners present, I felt something unexpected: gratitude. Not for the years of lies and betrayal, but for the clarity that had come from everyone's true nature being revealed. Michael's death had eliminated any possibility of him facing justice for his crimes, but it had also freed me from a marriage built on deception. More importantly, my family and friends' response to his death had freed me from relationships built on conditional loyalty and moral cowardice. 3 months later, I received a settlement check from Michael's life insurance policy, money that would allow me to start completely over somewhere new. The federal investigation had recovered most of the stolen funds, which were returned to his victims. The house sold quickly, and I used the proceeds to relocate to a city where nobody knew my story. Today, 2 years later, I've built a new life surrounded by people who value honesty over comfort, who believe in supporting each other through difficulties rather than hiding from them. I've learned that real family isn't determined by blood, and real friendship isn't maintained through convenient lies. Sometimes I wonder if my parents ever regret choosing Michael's reputation over their daughter's well-being, or if Emma has considered the cost of prioritizing financial benefits over sisterly loyalty. I wonder if Jessica ever realizes that true friendship requires courage, not just pleasant companionship. But mostly, I don't think about them at all anymore. The people who couldn't stand by me during the most difficult period of my life don't deserve space in the happy, authentic life I've created since then. The woman who stood alone at that funeral was broken and betrayed, but she was also finally free. Free from a marriage built on lies, free from family members who saw her as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be loved, and free from friends who confused loyalty with complicity. Michael thought he was so clever, planning his exit strategy and manipulating everyone around him. He never imagined that his death would give me the ultimate exit strategy, a chance to leave behind everyone who had chosen his comfort over my truth. You know what's crazy about family dynamics and loyalty? Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally are the first to abandon you when standing by you becomes inconvenient. I've learned that blood doesn't automatically create family, and years of friendship don't guarantee someone will choose courage over comfort when it matters most. Here's what I want you to think about. Have you ever been in a situation where everyone around you seemed more invested in maintaining a lie than supporting your right to know the truth? Have you ever discovered that the people closest to you were protecting someone else's secrets at your expense? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories help other people realize they're not alone in dealing with family betrayal. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about family drama, relationship betrayals, and the karma that eventually catches up to people who think they can manipulate others without consequences. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that sometimes the trash takes itself out, and that includes family members who don't deserve your loyalty. Thank you for listening to my story, and for all the supportive comments you've left on my previous videos. Remember, you deserve people in your life who will tell you hard truths because they love you, not people who will hide devastating lies because it's easier for them. Life's too short to waste on relationships that require you to stay ignorant to keep other people comfortable. Stay strong, trust your instincts, and never let anyone convince you that their comfort is more important than your truth. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.